The name John Chapman may not sound familiar. He was a wealthy businessman who in the late 1700s and early 1800s traveled the country buying plots of land and planting trees. His story became legendary. And while Chapman might not ring a bell, there's a good chance you'll recognize him by his nickname. Lindsay Wright has the story.
What comes to mind when you think of Johnny Appleseed?
Kind of like a rugged country, like a country boy. Maybe a little scruffy.
Maybe you think of this.
Oh, here am I, 'neath the blue, blue sky, a-doing as I please.
I think that very few people know the real John Chapman. I'm not sure I do, but an awful lot of people know this Johnny Appleseed character, you know, with the staff and the tin pot hat and little animals following along behind him, and that wasn't it.
Steve Fortreed is the author of Johnny Appleseed, the man behind the myth. He says some people don't realize Johnny Appleseed was a real person. His real name was John Chapman.
One of the things, because he traveled around so much, he would have been in the local newspaper. When he comes to your house, you really want to invite him in because you're going to find out what's going on back in the town you came from.
He was born in 1774 and traveled between Ohio and Indiana, planting apple tree nurseries.
He started moving west, entered Ohio in 1801, so he was here before we were even a state. When he came in, he started planting apple seeds. Those apple seeds would get to about 3 to 5 years old, and he would sell them to the settlers coming in.
Cheryl Ogden runs the Johnny Appleseed Museum in Urbana, Ohio, located on the grounds of Urbana University. She says education was important to John Chapman, and that's most likely why the museum came to be what it is. According to her, Chapman was a businessman, and a really good one at that. He provided early settlers with fruit trees so they could lay claim to a piece of property. The trees were a way for settlers to prove they were going to remain on that land.
Kind of fight that goofball image all the time. I really get frustrated with it. But like I said, we have to embrace it. It's how people still know him today.
But there are characteristics of the mythical image of Johnny Appleseed that hold true with John Chapman. Ogden says he was extremely generous, hardworking, a great storyteller, and most importantly, tolerant. But one of his most iconic trademarks does not hold true: the cooking pot hat.
To put the cooking pot on your head would not have been practical. It would have been hot, uncomfortable. It's just not something that would have been done as a hat.
John Chapman died in 1845 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, at the home of one of his friends. He's believed to be buried here in the Archer family graveyard. A memorial to Chapman sits on top of the hill.
Where we're standing here is almost certainly not where Johnny Appleseed was buried.
Fortreed says no one can say for certain exactly where Chapman's body was buried because there's no definitive record of it. He says it wouldn't be worth digging up remains at this point. Fortreed says the controversy is pretty much put to bed now, and maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing no one knows exactly where he's buried. The important thing, according to Ogden, is remembering the life John Chapman lived.
You can't judge by what you see, because he's nothing like what people believe him to be if you look at him. At least our perception of him. There are no actual pictures of him.
Ogden says Chapman died with more than 1,200 acres and $400 to his name, and his acts of planting apple trees created lasting effects.
So when he did that, it helped to determine what apples were going to thrive here, what could stay, what we needed to start grafting. It helped to determine that.
Only one of Chapman's apple trees is believed to still stand today. It's located in Nova, Ohio, and thought to be planted in 1837. An actual piece of the tree sits in the Johnny Appleseed Museum.
Our assumption as to what happened is that the seed was planted on an aquifer, so that the root system has been exceptionally strong.
It's owned by the Algea family, and they welcome anyone who wants to come see it. For Indiana News Desk, I'm Lindsay Wright.